This isn't actually any content from the main game. We kind of built an isolated, just kind of standalone piece of the game that it kind of has all of the major mechanics of the game compressed into like a really short demo, just to kind of give people a sense for where the systems go beyond the initial game. But the full game actually has it all like spread out over a sort of puzzle sequence with story and characters and all that kind of fun stuff. This is really just sort of like a compacted mechanical demo. But so like hack and slash is again about hacking, but instead of sort of like being about the aesthetic of hacking, it's about actual reverse engineering. So all of the mechanics in the game are things are sort of expressed in this sort of action adventure kind of context, but mechanically everything that you do is based on an actual like hacking principle. And so like I have this sword, but instead of a normal sword, it's got this like USB tip on the end. And so when there are things that have little ports in it, when you connect with them, you're actually pulling up this hacking interface that is letting you modify its variables. And so none of this is faked. Like part of one of the kind of core design tenets of the game is that all the stuff that we do is legitimately like is doing. It's not like we've curated a list of variables for you to edit that are like tied to the puzzles or whatever, but that these are actually. All of these fields are just the variables that are exposed on that objects in our game engine, so you can go through and modify any of these. So there will be things here that you need to solve puzzles, there will be things that are completely unrelated, there'll be things that are just like fun to play with that are just sort of like distinct. But so like for example, like Zelda blocks, put the remaining pushes number, we'll hack it back up so that we can keep moving this guy around. But we could also come in here and make the block slower to push for no reason, or we could make it so that every time that you push it, it moves two blocks instead of, or two tile spaces instead of one. But so like, here's a super simple puzzle. These guys are initially not configured so that they can be moved, but you can obviously change that and get through it. Like it extends to lots of objects. We use ports as like all of the objects that have ports on them are things that you can modify. So like this barrel, I can come in here and I can give it, make it so that it drops some hearts when it dies, and then I can drop its hit points to 0, and then like collect the hearts from it, that kind of stuff. There's a little guard up here. He's pretty tough actually because I just have this hack sword. He is pretty good at stabbing me. You'll notice he actually has a port on his backside.
So if you get behind him, you can hack him.
Exactly, or I can die. Yeah, so if we sneak behind him, we can actually get to that port and hack him.
And then you go left first.
Yeah. There's a conveniently placed block up here that allows us to circumvent that. But before I do that, I'm actually going to let's get around some of these blocks here. Open this treasure chest. I've gotten this thing that's called an artifact. Some of this UI is temporary, but artifacts in the game are basically global variables. And so like in the same way that you can sort of modify the variables on an individual object in the game, you also get these things that are sort of like globally true. And so the artifact I just got is max health, so I can sort of increase the number of maximum hearts I have, and I can sort of blow this up to some ridiculous number pretty easily. And then like, kind of this barrel and hack this guy so that it produces enough hearts for me to fill up my health. And then I'm going to collect all of them. Now we're good to go. So like one thing that I could do is just sort of like ignore the fact that the guard does damage to me now because I've got plenty of hearts to just like, it's sort of like styled after trainer systems that people would produce for games on PC in the early days where like, it just sort of like let you modify the game in a way where it totally broke some fundamental system that was built into it. And the game's kind of designed to be resilient against that stuff. It's like every time the player gets access to something that fundamentally allows them to break all the gameplay they've seen up to that point, we sort of like change what the game is about.
Are you excited though about the prospect of people like even getting around that and finding ways in your systems to just wreak havoc?
We've like some of the game's mechanics are things that we kind of discovered accidentally as we were putting some of these systems together. I'll talk about some of those later here, but the idea of like players, doing like really dramatically different things as they get through the game will be really exciting. It's like, so, it's not behind this guard now, he's hackable, so like one thing that we can do is set his damage to 0, and like, now he can get mad at me, but he just won't be able to even hit me. Let's see. Get up there. But like, there are other silly things that you could do that you might not think to do initially, right? Like we can take his move speed and we can actually just like go make it negative. And now when he's trying to chase after me, he's running backwards. So that guy's not a problem anymore. just keep going.
What was the thing about his name? His first pet's name? What was that?
The guards have like attributes about them that are not really related to gameplay, but like if you ran into another guard, they might chatter about something, and so like his I have a hard time sneaking it behind this game. Get this out of the way. His first pet's name is Mr. Pickles. Might not be directly tied to the gameplay, but maybe you'd bring it up. Maybe you could come in here and change his name to, or well, I guess it's change his first pet's name to something else, and now it'll talk about it differently the next time it comes through here. So there are lots of opportunities to just have sort of silly expressive things tied to characters that aren't part of the core mechanics, and it's just fun to mess with those things. Like you can see the character has a port on the back of her head. You can sort of anticipate things that you'd be able to hack about yourself that would just be fun expressive properties. We don't actually have the right equipment. There's another piece of equipment that's in the full game that would let you do that. But anyway, so another item I'll show you here is I've got this debug hat. So or we call it the third eye hat. When you put it on, it lets you see this sort of like extra information about the world. What it's really doing is just showing you the same debug overlay that we put in the game when we're testing like the physics of objects and things like that. So you can see things like this strong blue line is the like static collision for the level. These white boxes are the collision for the blocks. This box in front of the player is like a perception volume, all this kind of stuff. Actually, if we went back into this previous room and the guard will be reset, we can take a look at it. Like you can see its perception volume. So if you wanted to sneak around a group of guards, you could throw this hat on and just kind of like work your way through.
Yeah, and you've got like its vision code and stuff too.
Exactly. Can't get to this treasure chest yet. It's blocked off by these blocks that we can't hack. There's a keyhole up here. Let's goes up this way first. So here's another treasure chest. It's interesting sort of like block pushing puzzle, sort of a variation on some of these things. There's this platform that doesn't go out as far as we would need it to across this chasm. Come back to all that stuff. But, so take a look at this stuff here. There's another treasure chest. Come in. This looks like the obvious path in here. This block actually pushes backwards, though. So if you sort of like investigate this more closely, you might notice that it's like the tiles per push has actually been set to -1, so it's essentially pulled when you move it. And that can be a useful thing for getting around some of these other puzzles. We got our new artifact. This is the time dilation artifact. This one's pretty fun. So we can come here and actually slow down time. And my favorite feature is that it actually changes the audio. So which is actually useful because when we put our debug hat on, we'll see that there's actually an invisible platform up here. Mm-hmm. And it's slow, so we're using to get through this thing faster. And then, of course, you've got to have the opposite of that, too, with these fast platforms. The time dilation thing is not sort of like changing the simulation speed relative to the character or whatever. My movement's also slower, so like it's not easier to solve sort of like these precision puzzles in the sense that your character would walk fast and everything else would move slow. But it is easier in the sense that you don't need the twitch reflexes to get the timing right. But even slowed down, I'm still not good enough to do it. We'll get across this thing. Now I'm gun shy. But yeah, so like the global variables are like, sometimes when I'm playing through the game, I'll just like, take the time dilation and scale it up to a large number just so I can kind of traverse around a little faster until I get the stick of the music going too fast. It's fun to sort of like take restrictions that usually exist in games, that there's some that they're using to regulate some aspect of the design and your experience, and then just expose that thing to players and be like, do whatever you want to with this. It's not what this game is about. It's about sort of allowing you to modify things to your heart's content. We'll open this guy up. We got a book. The book's doing interesting. I'm going to take the shortcut, so I don't have to walk through that. The books in the world of Hack and Slash are files in the game's file system. So, like, the book that we just got, the UI is not finished for this yet, so what you'd be seeing is all of this art for like past this section of the game is stuff that this is an older build. We're working on getting this tuned up before we demoed AEW and the mix thing on Monday. But when we open this book up, we're actually in a room, or actually, we're actually in a room that represents the code of Lua file, like the script that drives this room that we're in this other world. So if we put on our debug hat, I forgot to get the annual with the codes, the glyphs. We'll go back to that in a second. But the thing that we're walking around in is actually the game's script files. As you go get the code, it would make more sense. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of show some of this stuff. When we go into one of these directories, this is actually, like, this machinery is wired up to one of the game's functions, basically. And so when you're in here and you're messing with things, you're actually messing with the fundamental code of the game itself. And so, like, part of the way that the game is designed is, like, you wouldn't necessarily come into something of this level of complexity from the very beginning. This is sort of like, seeing what all these variables are and all these kinds of, we would have a slow puzzle progression that would teach you what the machines do and how the variables work and all that kind of stuff. But the idea that, like, this isn't fake either. This is generated from the raw assembly of the game itself. And when you're modifying this, you're actually hacking the code in the same way that you would if you were reverse engineering the game as a hacker. And so, like, the function I'm in currently is actually the thing that governs, like, what happens when I push that button and the bridge gets built. And so, like, if we come in here and we hack this value here, this is the number of, like, bridge tiles that the thing constructs. Like, you look at that blue crystal, it's actually tied to this, like, for-loop hardware that triggers each of those tiles getting created. So when I hack this value and put it in some large number, we've actually, rewritten the code that the game uses when you're in that room. So when we come back out and we hit this button, we'll actually wind up building on the bridge.
So how drastically can you change things from within that sort of central part of the code?
So it's actually based on when you're hacking something for real, like when you're reverse engineering an actual application, like the code sequence is kind of fixed, and you can overwrite individual instructions, or you can overwrite the parameters to something, like, if it's adding two values together, right, you can change where those values come from, that kind of thing. There's no, like, typing lines of code into the game. Like, everything is expressed through these metaphors of these, like, procedurally generated rooms. In terms of what you have access to, you have access to everything, right? So, like, you can change any variable that a function uses. You can change the way that it interacts with the code that's written there, that kind of thing. And so, like, if you can get access to a book for something, or you can get access to its code room, you can change any property of it. There are some interesting problems that come up when you do that. Like, for example, if you introduce a crash, like if you modify a function in a way where it no longer does the right thing, it causes the game to blow up, then the game will crash. And we try and gracefully handle that. Instead of, like, your save game just being whatever you've done most recently in the game, your save game is actually all of the individual changes that you've made every time that you've stepped into a different room. And so when the game crashes, you can actually back up in your save state to the point before you made the code change that introduced the crash, fix it, and then go back to the point in the game where you were later. Let's see. So inside this treasure chest, we've got some bombs. Of course, these bombs don't work conventionally either, not mechanics. And we're sort of reusing these metaphors for very different things. But what these bombs do, and this part is temporary, apologize for that. I should get that. So this is that similar sort of, like, pushing this negative, get this block out of the way. Now that we've got the glyphs decoded, we can actually see that these labels that we're looking at earlier sort of, like, describe useful things.
Huh.
Let's go back to the program now.
Yeah, we can go back and record it, so I can show you. So, like, so you can see that these stairwells all lead to specific functions. Like, the names of the functions kind of describe what they're used for. Again, all of this is just sort of procedurally generated from the code. This isn't a curated list or anything. These are just all of the functions that happen to be on or in the room script for the room that we were just in. So that build bridge function, like, now that these are decoded, you can see a little bit more of what's going on. So, like, this for loop here is one of these things that you would sort of learn over time, but this for loop is regulated by this machinery here, and you can see that it's checking to see if the loop variable that's used in this sequence is, less than that blue number. And so when you go and hack that blue number and change it to something else, that was the mechanism that we used to extend that bridge. So, back up here, talk about the bombs. So the bombs are sort of a late game item that give you a lot of expressive power. When the bombs go off, this effect is so bad, we're going to fix this for Monday. The stun effect there is actually indicating that you can traverse into that item. So now we're in the code room for the item that we hit. So we're in the code room for the blocks, right? And so we can't get at the boss key down there because it's surrounded by these blocks that we can't hack. But the reason that they can't be hacked is because it is hackable function says that they can't be. So if we go flip this switch to true, its hackable function is now modified so that we can actually plug into these objects and bring up their hacking effects. So we'll just set to destroy the true for a few because that'll have a better effect to carve away into here. So and that's kind of the end of the demo. It was like sort of like trying to show you can build dungeons out with it, sort of overlay a lot of these mechanics. This door actually just leads to one of the other environments in the game to kind of show like what it looks like when you're actually in the outdoors and the artists are not just polishing up this thing that I carved together for the experimental gameplay workshop. But this is sort of more representative of what the final game will look like. And this final chest, we've got one last artifact called Complete the Demo. So if we set that to true, we'll just go back to the tower. But yeah, that's hack and slash. That's none of that is like sort of actual game content. All of that is just meant to show sort of like the mechanical diversity of the game. But it's kind of a subset of the items that you use. But that's kind of the progression that you have from just sort of like Game Genie style cheats where it's like you're taking individual attributes and modifying them in interesting ways to like the full expressive power of being able to go to any object in the game, go to its code, and then modify its fundamental behavior.
Well, yeah, I mean, just looking at this, like, okay, so you mentioned, like, Game Genie stuff. Was that an inspiration for this, or is it more like, because another thing that sprang to mind while you were playing this is that, like, with things like Broken Age, you let Double Fine let players inside the development process a lot more and sort of, like, had people on board with, these are the pieces that go into making a game. Is this sort of a further extrapolation on that idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think that's a major influence. I guess it's hard for me to unpack all of the inspirations for the game, but like fundamentally what the game is about is sort of my own experiences when I was a kid, like learning to reverse engineer things. Like really this game is inspired specifically by like the first time that I got an emulator and discovered the menu that allowed you to like search through the memory of the ROM and look for specific values and like check to see like you go get hit and then you check to see what every value in the entire simulation system that got reduced by 1, and then you go get hit again and then do that, and you sort of like isolate the place in memory where your health is, and then you go modify that thing so it's some ridiculous number. And like that's an aspect of just sort of like cheating in a Game Genie way to like get through a game more quickly, but it's very empowering. It was a very rewarding kind of thing. And then I sort of had the later inductive leap, like games that have, I really love games with secrets in them, with like lots of layers of hidden stuff to explore beyond the main game. I realized at some point that like a lot of those games where it seems very difficult to find those things because there's you have to burn this one specific tree on a path in NES Zelda to get into one of the dungeons, right? Is like those things are difficult to discover if you're just wandering around the forest trying to do it. But if you think really thoughtfully about it and actually look through the ROM code and search for things that interact with like being set on fire or something like that, you can get at those secrets in a way that the developer didn't intend for you to. And then it's just like it's a way to explore games that is I think really empowering and interesting and hasn't really been explored because we build our games to prevent players from doing those things. And so hack and slash is really about sort of inverting that and making the game that's all about discovering it by analyzing what's going on at the deeper level and modifying those things and seeing what happens as a result.
Will you be okay if people find a way to actually reverse engineer it? Like, because I mean, you've already laid so much of this bare, it seems like they wouldn't have to do a lot more to just go all the way in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's totally in the spirit of the game. I'm really curious to see like sequence breaking like playthroughs of the game, or there's like the game itself like is its own sequence breaking structure, and so like in terms of like modding the game, all of the mechanics of the game are the things that you would do if you were modding it. And so like I think it's actually a really interesting opportunity to like by the end of the game, the player is going to be so well versed in dismantling all of the individual components that they can turn it into whatever they want to. And I think we're really excited about that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you were demonstrating a few of the powers you get over the course of the game, but like, what other sorts of things will you be able to do by modifying the underlying structures of it?
Well, so for example, like I only showed going into one type of book, right? Which was the book that's backed by like a piece of script for the game itself. But if you grab a book that contains a sprite sheet for the character, you could flip through and see the individual frames and maybe deface them, or potentially like go find some frame that's not used or like that you haven't seen in the game before, and use that as the basis to sort of like go look at code that references that sprite sheet, figure out where that frame comes from, which logic is required to trigger that thing showing up in the game, and sort of like discover something that you might not have discovered through a normal playthrough. At the point that you have access to the code and all of the variables and all of the data files for the game, like there's basically nothing you can't do, right? Like you can build any game that you want to out of that.